Officially. So, welcome everyone officially. Thank you for joining us for today's expert interview on how to collect data, getting people to declare. My name is Rena Goldenberg Lynch, and I'm one of the two founders of the Big Fish D&I Academy. Inga Woodstrom, my partner, is also on here. And today we'll be speaking to Sarah Fox and Rebecca Salsbury from the BBC, and I'll introduce them more properly a little bit later. Just as we get started and people are still coming in, a very brief introduction to the Big Fish Academy in case this is your very first exposure to us, although I recognize many people already, but it's great to have everyone on, including those who have joined us for the very first time. The Big Fish Academy is a D&I training academy for those who practice diversity and inclusion or who would like to adopt it as part of their practices. And that also includes consultants like Inga and myself. So if you're just starting out or would like to understand more about how to be a D&I consultant, we're here to support you in many different ways, and the expert interviews is one such way. If you've joined before, you'll know the expert interviews are informal conversations that we have on various topics. We love for you to be on camera, as I said, so that we can feel that we're having a conversation. We are recording the session, and the session will end up on our website. So Chatham House rules do not apply. So if there is anything that you would like to say, think of it as, perhaps it will be found on the front page of a newspaper tomorrow. So keep that in mind, please. But we do welcome, as open as possible, all of your views and your thoughts and your experiences. Please do interact with us. I've got a couple of polls for us, and obviously through the chat. Inga will be monitoring the chat, so put your questions, comments, what have you, all throughout the session in there, and we will check in with Inga throughout the session to see what's coming up. So let's get started. Told you a little bit about ourselves. I will introduce Sarah and Rebecca shortly. Before then, however, it would be great to get a sense for who you are as our audience here today. So we have a poll, and that's it's numbered number 2, but it's the first poll that Inga, if we could launch, and hopefully you can see it now. And what we would like to know is how much experience in diversity and inclusion do you have? And I'll read out the questions for those who are listening to the recording later. So we have people who are full-time D&I leads within their organizations, some who might be independent D&I consultants, some are part-time D&I leads with other responsibilities as well. We have people whose role does not necessarily include D&I, but they volunteer some of their time in D&I, and those who are not currently involved in diversity and inclusion at all, but aspire to be working in this space. And it looks like so far about 36% of you are involved part-time in diversity and inclusion, but also have other responsibilities. That's the majority.
Shall I end the polling so they can see the results, right?
People are still voting. 79% voted. Okay, well, maybe share them now. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, not everyone can vote, so I think this is about it.
Okay, let's go. So let's share the results, and then you can
call. Just for those of you who've just joined later, we're just doing a first poll, seeing who we've got on the call, because we've got a nice big group today.
Yes, so most of you, like I said, 36% of you are part-time D&I leads with other responsibilities, but we also have a very good representation of people whose role it is on a full-time basis, and those who volunteer their time in D&I in whatever capacity. So thank you for that. Thanks very much, and welcome again. So let's start our conversation. If we could remove the poll from the screen, please, Inga. And I'll do that for myself.
Still there? I mean, I thought I deleted it.
Yeah, but mine was showing. So we're talking about data. Now, we know that data is important. What gets measured gets done. And it's also a way to measure ourselves about how well we're doing, where we might be lacking. It's important to understand, to show us whether we are in fact reflecting our client or customer or community base, if that's something that we want to do. It's important to understand why we're measuring, what is it that we want to get from the data. All that is not part of today. Today, we're going to be talking about how to. How do we measure and what do we do with that information? And that's why I'm particularly delighted to introduce you to our guests today, our guest speakers. We have Sarah Fox. Sarah Fox is a D&I lead at the BBC. And we have Rebecca Salsbury, who is Head of Product and Deputy Director for BBC Platform. And I'll ask them just briefly to introduce themselves a little bit more. Before I do, and in light of the BBC being such a central organization in this country, I want to emphasize the fact that whatever they're sharing with us today will be shared as their personal views and not representing the BBC formally. You will also talk to us about your experiences prior to the BBC as well, and your observations. So with that, let me ask Sarah first to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do at the BBC and perhaps some of the work that you've done already.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for inviting me today. I'm really pleased to be here. So as Rena said, I am one of the diversity and inclusion leads at the BBC. I've been at the BBC for almost 2 years, and well, I do lots of things, but I would say mostly what I do is I develop kind of training and development interventions around diversity and inclusion. So that could be anything from inclusive leadership to we need to talk about race or LGBT allies. And then the other thing I do is I partner with the business units of the BBC. So primarily BBC Technology, that's design and engineering, BBC News, and the other kind of corporate functions. So I don't really do anything to do with content or output. I'm focused on the internal environment. And before I worked at the BBC, I worked at Northern Trust, an investment bank, and I did D&I there for Europe, the Middle East and Africa. I've also been a D&I lead for the Law Society of England and Wales, and I started my D&I career by working at Stonewall, and I managed Stonewall's corporate workplace program, advising corporations on their D&I strategies around LGBT inclusion.
Thank you, Sarah. And Sarah has spoken at one of our Voice at the Table events in the past, so that's how we met many moons ago. And Rebecca also has spoken a number of our events with Voice at the Table. Rebecca, please do introduce yourself.
Thank you, Rena. Hi, everyone. My long title, Head of Product and Deputy Director. Basically, I'm a product and engineering lead in the design and engineering division of the BBC. It means that I lead teams who create and deploy software to make the BBC Online possible. All this razzmatazz behind me is because my team is currently having a virtual, flexible first remote Olympics from home today. So I thought I'd take a little break and chat with all of you about collecting data and how I and my colleagues use it at the BBC.
Yeah,
nice
exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you both for joining. And the reason that, again, I asked both of you to come in is because Sarah is a D&I sort of professional, as let's call it, and then Rebecca is her essentially in-house client. And so that way we can see the way that the two work together. Well, let's dive straight in. So we know why we're collecting data, or at least let's assume that we know why we're collecting data. Let's talk about what type of data we should be collecting. What are we looking for, Sarah?
So yeah, I'll talk about like the types of data that I use. Well, first of all, like I think data, and I'm sure a lot of people on this call will agree, forms the basis of like absolutely everything that I do every single day. I, don't think you can really get anywhere in D&I without using data in lots of different ways. And the data points that I tend to use, which I find powerful and persuasive, are the standard ones. So recruitment, what's the journey of candidates? Who have we got applying to our organisation? And then who do we eventually actually give roles to? And that is incredibly revealing data. It's really interesting. Then the standard kind of snapshot of your staff force. So, what's the makeup of our staff force versus what's the makeup of our leadership? Attrition data. So what are the percentage of people from different characteristics that are leaving our organization? And then, so I think those are very standard. Other things like short-term sickness absence data and progression data. So who's moving up the organization? That's the things we all look at. I think it's helpful to layer other things on top of that. So something that I've done to build out a lot more kind of detail around that data is that I've rung people who've left the BBC in the last 2 years, and I've asked them questions about what their experience working at the BBC was and why they left and what the environment is like that they've now gone to, because that adds a lot of, people love stories, so when you show the recruitment data and the attrition data, it tells a story about inclusion, but you then need to pad that out with people's experiences. So I find that really valuable. And then beyond that, the other data that I think is important to be very aware of and collect and use every day is best practice data from other organizations. So business case data, there's some really powerful statistics out there. EY survey their teams every year and they ask them how included they feel. On teams that score high for inclusion, those teams are £120,000 per head more profitable than on teams that score low for inclusion. So that external best practice data is also part of the way that you work. I think is a really important part of the way that we need to work inside the organisation. And then finally, and something that we are just starting to do at the BBC, but other organisations have been doing to great effect for many years, is like to collect a measure around inclusion on a regular basis. So we are launching an inclusion index, which will measure leaders on how inclusive they are. And what I mean by that is, what is their team's perception? What's their team's feeling of being included? And we'll be feeding that back to leaders on a 6-monthly basis and also rolling it up so we have an inclusion score for the organisation. And that, and in my, sorry, I'm rambling on a bit, but diversity data really, it's telling a story about inclusion, but when you present diversity data consistently, people tend to focus on diversity. Oh, well, we just need to hire 2 more of that type of person. It's like, well, you've just lost 5 of them while we were having this discussion. So having this inclusion score, I think, can just help to shift the focus of people's efforts and again, build out that picture. So, yeah.
So that's a great answer and has provided quite a lot of information. I just want to break it down a little bit. There are a couple of things that you said that particularly I was interested, but I'm sure some of the other people listening in, and please don't forget to put your questions into the chat box. So let me ask you, Sarah, obviously the BBC collects a ton of data and you do a lot with it. But for an organization that is smaller and perhaps they're just starting out, would you recommend that we start with a specific type of data because we can't do it all straight away?
Yeah, I mean, look, well, you can. Because actually in a small organization, these things are can almost be simpler to get up and running because they don't involve huge big HR systems. I would say definitely give people who apply for jobs at your organization, give them a monitoring form, because how can you even form a strategy unless you know who's interested in working for you and where your gaps are? And then, secondly, I would say, like, see who you've got in your organization. So see who's applying, and then how that translates into who's actually within your organization. Those are two great places to start.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for that. And then just around this inclusion score, will you be able to say a bit more about that? Well, how do you generate the score, and what are some of the questions maybe that go into that survey?
Yeah, so the first thing that would be on this inclusion index is like people would be able to see how their department's performing around diversity, recruitment, attrition, all of those kind of things, short-term sickness absence. But then, like, what is most important is we then ask two further questions to staff, which are, oh wow, I'll have to remember them now. Yeah, I feel comfortable to be myself when I come to work, and my leader values me and demonstrates inclusion in the way that they work with me. And those two questions, like, well, we track those in our staff engagement survey, but historically that's been every 3 years. So we're now actually going to track those every 6 months. And yeah, then leaders will receive that feedback in a very specific way, their own kind of scorecard every 6 months.
Thank you for that. Inga, are there any other questions on the chat at the moment?
Yeah, everyone loves to hear more about this inclusion index. So that was a great question,
Dear.
but especially Sarah, I mean, the key question I think is, I mean, would there be something you could share with us that we can, or is there a best practice standard template, or is there something that you were drawing on that you might be able to share?
Yeah, I mean, like, so far it is just those things that I've outlined, and I'm really happy to kind of make a note of what those things are. If people, in fact, I mean, I won't post it now, but like, I got a little kind of prototype into my inbox last week, so I'm really happy to share that, and I'll just take out any kind of BBC specific stuff.
Oh, that would be fabulous. And then another question, actually, you mentioned EY data. About the impact of inclusion. I mean, where can we find that? That would also be lovely.
Yeah, so I can share it again. Like, so I get that. EY have published that externally. They published it externally, but it was quite a few years ago when they first did it. It was maybe 5 years ago. But I also have their like most recent data on it because I asked them for it. So yeah, I don't think there's any problem with me sharing that. But like, in case you want to hear that again, it's that on teams that score high for feeling included at EY, so they're running something like an inclusion index to track how included their teams feel. Those teams are £120,000 per head more profitable than on teams that score low.
Yeah, I know, that sounds so interesting. So I'd love to have those and be able to share. And then one last question, and then some questions are coming up that we'll keep for later because they are all topics that we're going to talk about. And that was, so does each manager at the BBC have their own inclusion score? And Rebecca was saying, yeah, that's what we're indeed working towards, right? Is that right?
Yeah, do you want to say more about that, Rebecca, at all?
It hasn't started yet, but this is something, diversity inclusion is part of our brand new Director General's priorities for the organization. So it's been, Sarah and her team have been working on it, and it's all been very openly communicated, and so it's going to happen.
Oh, and that questions there, keep them coming, right?
Yeah, keep coming up with the questions. But it's a great segue into that next question that is also popped up, but I also have on my list, is how do you encourage people to share that data? I mean, obviously there is somebody at the very top, like the Director General, will have to say this is important information, and for the BBC also you have to report it publicly, so that there is an internal drive or an impetus to ask for the data. But what do you say? How do you encourage it? I understand it's all voluntary, but is there anything else, any kind of nudges or encouragements that you give people to share?
Yeah, look, I mean, there is very standard things that you do on comms, right? To like assure people that it's confidential and like to assure them of the reasons why you're collecting it. But yeah, in my experience, that really can only go so far. What people need to see is that you're using the data. They need to see what you're doing with it to be able to trust you. So I worked at a bank before, and you know, we didn't have to be really transparent about data in the way that we've got to be at the BBC, because we have like a public duty to put our data out there. And it's really interesting because our declaration rates were much lower at the bank, and I genuinely believe that's because people couldn't see as freely what we were doing with the data. So I think like collect it and then, you know, put it out there, use it, but use it to inform your strategy, and then follow up on that strategy, take the actions you said that you would take, and then report back on what impact those actions had. And I know that's very long-winded, but that is how you drive confidence and trust. It's not like you can't, I don't think there's any quick thing that you can do overnight to build that confidence and trust in your organization. I mean, we have massively high declaration rates, but I can't take responsibility for that because I've only worked at the BBC for 2 years. You know, but I was really like impressed that when I joined, we have like 93% on ethnicity, 100% on gender, obviously, but like, you know, in the high 80s for LGBT, like that's kind of unheard of in my past professional experience. But I believe it's because we're constantly putting it out there and people can really see very transparently what happens with it. So, and you know, I really made an effort at the bank to just talk about the data. Every talk I gave, like, you know, I would talk about, you know, what this data is and what it's informing. So use every opportunity you can to let people know what you're doing with it.
So socialize it and use it and show that you're using it. And how Rebecca, how has the data collection part kind of changed throughout the years at the BBC? And the reason I ask that question is because, you know, we do want to understand that it is a journey. It's not something that, you know, happens overnight. So if you're just starting out, it's helpful to understand kind of the process or the time that maybe, and you've been with the BBC for a long time. So can you tell us what your experience has been?
I don't think that our collection has changed very much over time. I mean, it's probably more systematized. Probably used to collect everything by hand not so long ago. But I think we've always collected data. We probably expanded some elements, you know, a bit more on class, for instance, that kind of thing, socioeconomic background. What we have done, though, is certainly, I've been in for about 10, 11 years, and as a senior leader, we've only started to really get more and more visibility of this data, I would say in the last 6 or 7, 8 years, maybe, where our HR partners, now we have diversity and inclusion partners like Sarah, are keeping that data front and center in our work. So we're reviewing it on a periodic basis. We have discussions about what do we draw from this data? What do the insights tell us? What do we need to do differently? What kinds of interventions might we try? I think over the time, we tend to look at data to help us solve problems that we're perceiving. So we tend to kind of go, what's going on with our recruitment? How come we're not getting candidates that are of diverse backgrounds? Let's go and look at what might be happening, use the data to shine a light on it.
Okay, so you're using the data in both ways, really, just to answer some of the questions that might come up. around diversity, and then you look into the data and draw conclusions or initiate actions. And we'll talk in a minute about the sort of the deeper impact on sort of the change, if you will, on the culture with you in a second. But before we do that, I'd love to launch the second poll, which is actually cleverly numbered 1, and that's around to get me to understand, to get us all to understand, are you at present collecting data? And if so, what data are you collecting? So the options are: we don't collect any data, we collect gender and race data only, we ask for information on a number of protected characteristics, or we are very good at collecting all the data we need to succeed at D&I. So those are the options, and there might be a couple of other options. If you want to share a variation of that inside chat, that would be quite useful as well. So we have people are still voting, but looks like a lot of data is being collected on a number of protected characteristics, so that's really good. Quite a few people are or organizations represented on this call are getting a lot of data. Some actually quite a large percentage already. I think we're done voting now, close to 75%, so you can share the results. Yes, so over 50% have said that you are collecting data on all or a number of different protected characteristics, whereas 26%, so 12 people who responded, said they don't collect any data at all. Well, it'd be interesting to hear your views as well. If you've said you don't collect any data, whether you would want to and what the obstacles are. So if you are able to put that in the chat, you can, I think, put it in the chat anonymously as well. Yeah, thank you very much. And 5 of you said that you're very good at collecting all the data that you need. Fantastic, thank you. Right, let's close the poll and the box. It's still on my screen, so I'll close it. And let's move on a little bit about, the other side of the data. So we're collecting a lot, you're doing a lot with it, you're pressing for change and how the data is used. Tell us, Rebecca, how persuasive is it?
Well, it depends who you're talking to, I think. I remember I'm being candid and I'm giving you my own perspective. Data, as we all know, anytime you look at data, it causes you to have more questions sometimes than answers. And so quite often as leaders, we're looking at the data and we're going, how can that be? Or sometimes it's a bit of shock and awe, like some of the data is really powerful. It's kind of showing you, here's where your problem is. It doesn't give you solutions. So I think sometimes we can feel a bit defensive.
Yeah.
As leaders, we feel responsible for the makeup of our teams and the health of our companies. And if the data is saying it's not good, we immediately get our hackles up and start trying to imagine what the excuses are. Just thinking about our staff survey results, it's always very hand-wringing kind of time when the results come through. We all want to do well. We all want to think that we're doing the best by our teams and our people, but and so we can have an unhelpful defensive reaction sometimes when we get that data, and some people more than others. And some will start to charge in and challenge the data. There must be this thing wrong with the data. It's not a comprehensive set. It's not significant enough, blah, blah, blah. You have to, I think when you're presenting the data, as Sarah said, if you combine the data with anecdotal information that brings it to light, that can be helpful, but also risky, because if someone latches onto one person's story or a few examples that bring the data to life, they can kind of focus too much on those examples and forget to go back and look at the wider data set. So Rena, I've already forgotten what you asked me. I'm just remembering now.
Oh, how persuasive it is. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think, you know, whatever your favorite cliche is, there's no smoke without fire. The data is showing us the smoke. And so we need to get in there and figure out what's going on. And as I say, it doesn't give us solutions, but it should make us reflect, consider, hunt for, have discussions about what might be going on and what we might like to try to alleviate problems.
Yeah. That really summarizes it very well, because I think that is one caution around data that I'd like to emphasize as well, is that it's really easy to argue with it, you know, and people do take offense at it. They do take it very personally, I think. So whenever you share, if that's what you want to do as a D&I leader, you need to be prepared for the backlash, for the pushback, and for the fact that it's going to take some time for people to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And so, Sarah, how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I set it up. I mean, so I that have lots of D&I colleagues on this call who might disagree with me, but like,
Speak up if you do.
Please do. Yeah, you know, to me, like, well, I started my career in corporate selling, and as a D&I person, like, I also view myself essentially as a kind of salesperson. Like, I'm always like trying to pitch a picture, a story, like, which I think is a very accurate story, otherwise I wouldn't be pitching it, about what is actually going on. So it's like, well, given that I know that people get very defensive, white people particularly when you show them data about race, men particularly when you show them data about gender, like, we just humanly have this response in us where it's so deeply uncomfortable that we just want to silence it. So I like, and you know, again, you might disagree with me, but knowing that that is the case, like, I set it up. So I say, I'm going to show you some data. It tells us a story about inclusion. And I say, this can be very, very uncomfortable to see. If you have not seen this before, it can be very shocking. So if you feel uncomfortable, that's okay. You're kind of supposed to feel uncomfortable. And then I say, and it can be very natural to feel very defensive when you see this data and start to search for any other answer than what you're seeing in front of you. And I also say, you know, this isn't to make any one person feel bad. You know, this isn't about blame. But we need to be aware of what's happening in our organization. We need to bring awareness to this issue if we're going to do anything about it. So, yeah. I set it up, and some people might disagree with that approach, but it, like, then when someone gets defensive, you can say, like, you know, like I said, it's very natural to feel defensive. So you've, kind of, it still happens. Of course, people still stand up and say, don't call me racist. Like, but you've at least set it up in a way that might be more conducive, and also say, you know, like, I want you to express your feelings and thoughts. Like, this is a safe space, and we're going to hold each other's feelings and thoughts about this and kind of work it through together as a team. Like, I also like set myself up as part of their team for that period of time. So yeah, it's not kind of a me against you. It's like, how can we resolve this together?
Yeah, so it's difficult because it kind of pitches you in a slightly unfavorable light when you come into the room with this data that nobody wants to see, because they know that it's going to potentially present some information that they don't want to see or hear. But yeah, setting it up, I agree with that. I think it absolutely needs to be set up and primed. And I even go a step further to say, let's all assume that this data is correct, and let's not argue with it for the sake of this conversation. And you almost have to do that, because people are, especially professionals who deal with data all the time, they're going to want to dissect it. And I think also in that case, as you said, Sarah, it helps to bring in the live element, the quotes, the specific examples of what people have said and experienced into the room to demonstrate some of the data that you collect. So that's really helpful. So are there any examples of, and we'll go to the audience in just a minute, I just want to ask one question. Are there any examples, maybe Rebecca, that you can share where the data has led to a specific initiative or specific action that then improved the data?
I'm trying to think of one that I guess one of the problems is that you can't always pinpoint, oh, well, we did that and it moved the data. So there you go. Because we're doing lots of different things at the same time. But what I could say, because I work in the technology and engineering part of the BBC, we have always had a gender imbalance, which is well understood in the industry. At the BBC, we've got about, is it like 30%-ish, Sarah?
Yeah.
Women in design and engineering. And then if you narrow that to specifically technical roles, it gets worse.
Yeah.
And so we've been trying a lot of different kinds of things to improve the numbers of women that we are hiring, and as Sarah says, retention. P.S. You need to know your maths, and it's surprising how many people don't. Like Sarah said, that example of, I have sat around tables with colleagues who've gone, well, we just need to hire some more women. And I'm like, yeah, but not if they're all leaving at a fast pace. Yeah. And if you do the maths, you will never have enough vacant roles into which to hire women if you could find them. So I remember having to explain to a colleague that basically every new hire we did for the next like 5 years, we'd have to be hiring a female software engineer in order to get anything like the target that they were setting. But anyway, we have taken a number of actions. The most effective one is raising awareness, showing people that in our recruitment pipeline, we have X number of people applying. These are the ones getting shortlisted. These are going to interview. These are being offered. These are accepting the role. Is the most impactful thing that I think we can hang our hat on and say, there you go. As soon as we raise awareness with people, they start becoming more conscious. They start to ask their recruiter to go and find them some more female candidates, for example. And they're making sure that their shortlists contain one or more women. And if they need to keep going out to the market and seeking a more diverse candidate pool, that's what they do. So I guess that's probably the main example, Rena. There's probably lots more that are not coming to my mind at the moment.
Yeah,
go on, Sarah.
No, I just add exactly what you just said, Rebecca, about awareness raising. So when I started 2 years ago in Rebecca's department, in design and engineering as a whole, I mean, the hiring pattern was strongly in favor of men. If you applied as a man, you were probably you've just factually were more likely to get a role. So in the 2 years that Rebecca and her team have been working on really raising awareness around gender, but I mean, there's so many things have happened. We've run inclusion workshops, we've had programs to retrain women into tech, we've had a returners program, we've had awareness raising events, all of these different things. The hiring pattern has shifted. So we're now hiring in favor of women in design and engineering. We can't say which one thing, but that is a massive shift to happen in a 2 year period. It's still not going to holistically fix the issue, well, there's no fixing, that's the thing, it's just constant improvement. But it is a huge shift that has happened in a 2-year period. Yeah.
Which is amazing.
The other thing that we've done is, I would say, I get a lot of calls from colleagues saying, we're hiring a senior role, could you join our panel? Which is basically saying, hey, we need a girl. And I used to be really like harumphy about it. And now I'm like, oh, thank you for asking me. Yes, let me just see how I can clear my whole freaking diary so I can be a woman on your interviewing panel.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you have to do that, I suppose, to change, do the kind of things you wouldn't want to do, and use the data as much as you can to raise awareness and to influence decisions. And I wanted to talk to you about that. But first, let's see, are there any questions from the audience?
Yeah, a couple coming in. One is really, I mean, which is going back to gathering data and how inclusive leaders are. So you get this score back that you're one of these leaders that isn't very inclusive. What do you then do to build capability? You know, how do you wait for people to ask? Do you actually offer it to people? Look, here's your bad score. Now we need to, I mean, how does that work?
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to speak to that, Rebecca? Or yeah, okay. So well, the number one thing is that we're just launching that. So like it's literally just being launched off the back of our new Director General taking over, Tim Davey. So that will play out over the next couple of years. But at the minute, we still do lots of interventions that are geared towards inclusive leadership. So we have like a suite of leadership programs. And look, I really appreciate that everyone doesn't work in an organization where this is possible. So I'll give some examples of free things as well. And inclusive behaviors, being an inclusive leader is kind of wired into those central suite of leadership programs that we offer. So on top of that, we do, and this is free, reverse mentoring. Like, look, it's quite a lot of work. I run those programs. Like, yeah, you have to put quite a bit of work in, but it is free to do. We also, have designed these workshops called Everyday Inclusion, which is just training people about inclusive behaviors. Like training people about basic things like, you know, micro inequities, like having conversations about biases, encouraging people to have open conversations about bias, encouraging people to think about what it's like to be in a minority. Yeah, so like I run these workshops. We're also launching an inclusive leadership kind of an approach to inclusive leadership in the organization. We do all of these things, but ultimately, like the message in every single initiative that we do is you now need to take responsibility for becoming more inclusive every day. And we like recommend 3 things that people need to do on an ongoing basis, which is to be educated, to be self-aware, and to be an advocate. And you know how people want to approach those things is they have to take responsibility for it. But like say on Be Educated, what we will offer to do for people is put them into like an action learning set, and then those learning sets will meet up on a monthly basis to discuss, like, you know, it might be that they read Renied O'Lodge's blog, or you know they watch a TED talk, or they listen to a podcast, and then they meet up as a group to discuss that piece of material. So we'll facilitate people and help them form the connections to do those things, but everything is about giving responsibility to the employee for taking ownership of being more inclusive every day.
And if you don't have a Sarah Fox at the tips of your fingers, Inga and I can also help with some of those programs and training.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anything more questions? Yes, some questions around staff networks, which I just want to mention is actually our topic for our next expert interview, which is on, let me see, in October, on the 29th of October. So, I mean, do join us for that. But the key there maybe is like, is there a link between having staff networks and inclusion figures? And that's, I'm not sure a link that anyone directly measures. You know, I'm getting from your story as well. It's about having all these measures and that will get your inclusion score up. Would that be right?
Yeah, like, you know, the thing I used to really, early in my D&I career, I used to really stress out when I would go to a senior leadership team and then they go, okay, well, what can we do about it? And now I say, well, there isn't one thing you can do about it. There's lots of things that we can help you with. Like, it's a big, complex problem, diversity and inclusion, and there isn't a single answer to it. Like, yeah, and so staff network groups, in my opinion, are part of that answer and are a very positive, can be a very positive force inside organizations. If you work well with them, you listen to them, and you resource those networks with the things that they need, I'm sure that they add up to improving that inclusion score.
Yeah, most of our networks, I would say, are helpful in terms of retention. You know, they help staff who feel out, you know, excluded, to develop resources, to be around people who feel the same way they are, to find other jobs in the organization. So, you know, builds the support among the staff, which helps us retain people.
That's really
I think here a great question. We ask this information, but we don't get it back, and it's not really a question, but I would like to make it into one, because we now want to encourage their staff, this person says, it's Yawanda, to complete their D&I information via our HR self-service system. So is that for you? Does it matter where you collect this data? You give a monitoring form at the start, but then you also mentioned you do scans sort of, or polls, something quick polls halfway. So where do you keep this information? What is it? Yeah, what kind of, at which point do you ask people to share this?
So we ask at all stages of the employee life cycle. So we ask at recruitment, we ask, you know, who's in our organization. We run like a census every few years, and, you know, we obviously monitor exit as well. Like, you know, I don't think it matters how you do it, as long as you are complying with all the rules around how that data needs to be stored. Like, I've never seen the data. Obviously, I've only seen the rolled up data because only one person in our organization can see that. And look, we have got, again, whenever I come to things like this, it really reminds me about the luxuries I have. Like, we have an HR data team. So they kind of look after the legalities and particulars. So, yeah.
Oh, and great question there to follow up. What tools do you use then, Sarah, to analyze the data? Is that something manual? Do you go for Excel? Do you have something like Click?
Yeah, my brain. Yeah, just literally spreadsheets. We just get spreadsheets, and then like, but look, our HR data team are amazing, and they'll pull it into all sorts of packs, and yeah, like they are. Yeah, we're very lucky to have that resource. Do you use anything different within D&E, Rebecca, to look at the data in?
No, I mean, every company runs on Microsoft Excel, right? or Google Sheets.
And Zoom now.
Yeah. No, I'd say, yeah, we don't have access to, you know, anything that would be identifiable. So we get lots of raw data. Usually it's in a summary form. So we just get a flat image that says, here's where you are compared to your sister and brother departments. But quite often we get some raw data that we can interrogate ourselves, like staff engagement data and that sort of thing. But we just use spreadsheets for that.
Is there any data that you would like to have that you can't get for some reason?
What a great question.
I'm sure it happens in many organizations. I know I've lived it, where I've asked, when I was back in corporate, asked for information and was not given the information for whatever reason. So is there? So
something that I actually like, well, I can get this, but we don't have it readily available, is promotion data. Like, I can, like, we could absolutely get it, but it's hard. You have to, like, really kind of, and it can take kind of weeks to get it. Something else that I have got this data, but it's not easy to get to, is we have something in the BBC called attachments. And so this is where, like, a job, someone will go on maternity leave, say, and then
it's like a secondment. Normal companies call it a secondment.
Yeah.
Normal companies.
Yeah.
And, like, I have a theory that if you go on attachment and you move around the organization, a theory that's shared by, like, hundreds and hundreds of people, obviously, that it's then easier for you to move into other jobs. And at the minute I can see what percentage of people that go on attachment go on to be promoted, but I haven't been able to get that broken down by protected characteristic, and I think that would be fascinating. Yeah.
Then a question here, Sarah. Oh, sorry, go on, Rebecca. Because
well, I was just going to say, I think, and Sarah, maybe this is changing, but I think reasons for leaving have historically been really crude. Like, I got a different job, I felt like it, and something else, and that's just rubbish, right? You need really granular, and you need to give people, most people have more than one reason for leaving. So that I think would help. We tend to use exit interviews, but we kind of have to organize that locally. And then there's a whole question about how open will people be willing to, yeah, you know what I mean?
Usually their job, it's their boss, isn't it? The reason for leaving.
Yeah, but
that's what 70% of people say.
No, I think tell us more about that.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
I want to know, what is it about their boss that is driving them to kind of make up another story about it's a better salary.
Yeah. Speaking of salaries and resources more generally, do you use the data to argue for budgets, maybe for support in certain departments or networks?
Yeah.
You do.
Great.
Yeah,
like, you know, our new DG just, like, said what he wanted from the organization. So, like, I did the research behind what he wanted to do and said, then this is how much it'll cost you. Like, you know.
Did you get it?
Well, that is in the... We shall see. You're speaking to us at an interesting time where we've just got a new Director General, and we're literally just proposing what the D&I strategy should be. But, and every senior leadership team that I talk to, it's like, it's going to cost you. It'll cost money. Like, you can't do stuff for free. So
yeah, absolutely.
Great question. Now, do we have time for this, Rena?
We have, go ahead. A quick question,
Yeah, because obviously easy to collect data, or easy, but ethnicity, age, gender, you collect data, sexual preference, I understand. Question here, do you also collect data on socioeconomic status? And if so, how? What questions do you ask for that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we do. So we, do you know what? Like, socioeconomic data is so hilarious. So there's these three questions you ask people, like, you know, what did your parents do when you were age 14? What kind of school did you go to? And there's another one. You can find it on the Social Mobility Foundation website, right? And then people give you this information, and then from that we decide what class people are, like, which I just think is kind of, you know, everything else we self-declare. Like, we say what our ethnicity is, we say what our gender is, we say if we have a disability, and then, like, we ask this convoluted list of questions, and then we decide what class people are. I think that is ridiculous, but that is how it's done throughout UK PLC. Like, I think we should be asking, are you working class, middle class, or, you know, whatever? And what class were you when you were 14 years old? And what class do you identify as now? And people should be able to self-identify their class. Like, it's so arrogant. Like, but anyway, that is currently how it's done. And we just started doing that 3 years ago, and we have about 60% declarations on that, so we'll be going out again to increase those declarations.
And I know it's public data, so are you able to share with us what class the BBC is made up of?
Yeah, I mean, so when you look at this characteristic, the key measure that people look at is people whose parents did a routine or manual occupation when they were 14 years old. So there's all these questions, but that's the key one. That's the key determiner, really. That's the figure that you're looking to increase. And at the BBC, I just did I think it's around 28%. Don't quote me on that though, seriously, but it's somewhere around there. But 60% of the UK population are working class. Now, when 60% of the UK population say they're working class, that does not mean that their parents did a routine or manual occupation when they were 14. I identify as working class, and my parents were junior administrators in the civil service. So we can't exactly infer that people who answered that question in that way that's the whole working class population, but it's a good indicator, I think.
Yeah, and I think we have to take your point on board that the data as it is currently collected on socioeconomic background isn't very reliable, so I'm not entirely sure what can be done with it. So my question was just pure curiosity. I don't think it is reflective of anything. We are running out of time. Don't raise your hand. No,
Okay,
sorry.
I am so sorry, Emily.
But I would love to start finishing off with just summarizing, well, not summarizing, maybe extracting the one thing that Rebecca and Sarah, you would like to leave us with, so that if there was only one thing that everybody could remember from today, what, in your opinion, should that be? Let's go with Rebecca first.
Okay. I would say, we talked about how uncomfortable people are when they're faced with the data. The trick is to convince them to just do something, to roll with it, do something, take some action, make a change. It might work, and it might have unintended positive consequences anyway.
Great one, thank you. And you, Sarah?
Yeah, I would say, use data to tell a story and put your story out there with courage and with kindness. Yeah.
There you go. Thank you very much. And I invite each one of you to share your one learning from the session today in the chat if you can. And while you do that, I want to thank both Sarah and Rebecca for being so honest and so informative on the session today. There is no doubt in my mind that you will be back in one shape or form on one of our sessions again. So thank you very, very much. And a quick reminder of what's coming up for the rest of the year from the Big Fish Academy. Next month, as Inga already said, we're talking about staff networks and what their purpose is. Important to maintain them and support them. So join us for that. In November, we're talking about masculinity. So join us for that and the redefinition of that, or perhaps in my eyes, a redefinition of that and what that looks like. And then we also have a training program at the end of the year, I think it's November, where we're going to take a look at everything that we've done this year in training, reflect over the things that have happened in 2020, what we've learned from that, what was good, what was bad, and how that will inform our planning from a diversity and inclusion perspective for next year. So if you've got time, join us for that one. The details of all of that can be found on our website, which is unsurprisingly thebigfishacademy.com. So thank you all very much for your questions, for your participation, and I really look forward to seeing you again. And thanks Rebecca and Sarah and Inga as well. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Good to see everyone.